The savage wind lashed across the frozen plain, driving snow like tiny daggers against any exposed flesh. In the center of that white wasteland lay a motionless figure, nearly swallowed by the merciless expanse. Blood stained the snow beneath her, not much, but enough to trace a crimson path across the pristine white. The Shieldmaiden's fingers had long since lost feeling, her consciousness fading as the cold penetrated to her very core. Sigrun Eiríksdóttir's last thought, before darkness claimed her, was not of battle glory or Valhalla's golden halls, but of the young girl whose secret would either save their people or destroy everything. 24 hours earlier, dawn broke reluctantly over the settlement of Hrafnheim. The weak winter sun barely penetrated the thick cloud cover, casting the world in shades of gray and shadow. Inside her modest dwelling, Sigrun Eiríksdóttir stirred beneath layers of furs, her body tensing before her eyes even opened, a warrior's instinct never truly at rest. The bitter cold had crept through every crevice overnight, making the small hearth's dying embers seem pitiful against winter's assault. Rising with practiced efficiency, Sigrun stretched her lean, muscular frame. At 26, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had already seen more battles than most would in a lifetime. Her calloused hands moved automatically to her dark brown hair, weaving it into a simple, practical braid that would keep it from her eyes during patrol. The routine was as familiar to her as breathing: awaken, prepare, serve, survive. Yet lately something had been gnawing at her spirit, an unnamed restlessness that made Hrafnheim's walls feel more like a prison than a home. Another day watching nothing happen, she muttered to herself, running a thumb across the iron pendant that hung at her throat, her mother's final gift before fever had claimed her 3 winters past. The pendant was simple, unadorned, much like everything else in Hrafnheim. Nothing wasted, nothing excessive, just survival. Sigrun pulled on her leather armor, its surface worn smooth in places from years of use. Each scratch and scuff told a story. The raid from the eastern tribes, the wolf pack that had threatened their livestock last winter, the training sessions where she had earned the grudging respect of men twice her size. She secured her fur-lined cloak with a bronze pin, its weight a comfort against the biting cold that awaited outside. Through the small window she could see villagers already moving about, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The blacksmith's hammer rang out. Her father Eirik would be at his forge until nightfall, as he had been every day since she could remember. The man who had taught her to hold a sword before she could properly speak now barely acknowledged her presence. Not since she had chosen the path of a Shieldmaiden instead of taking a husband and providing grandchildren. The gods give us the strength they think we need, she reminded herself, not the strength we want. It was something her mother used to say, usually after Sigrun had come home bloodied from fighting boys who mocked her ambitions. Hrafnheim was isolated by necessity, perched on the edge of civilization where the mountains met the sea. The settlement served as a trading outpost during the warmer months, but in winter it became a fortress against the elements and occasional raiders desperate enough to brave the snow. 50 families, perhaps 200 souls in total, all bound by blood, necessity, and the harsh reality that survival depended on absolute loyalty to the clan. Sigrun stepped outside, her boots crunching on the fresh snow. The settlement was alive with morning activity, women carrying water from the well, men checking defensive positions, children hauling firewood. Everyone with a purpose, everyone with a place. Everyone except her, it sometimes seemed. Sigrun. The voice belonged to Bjorn, a barrel-chested man who served as the head of the village guard. "Northern perimeter today. Take Life with you." She nodded curtly, suppressing a grimace. Life was young, eager, and talked incessantly. 3 qualities Sigrun found particularly taxing during long, cold patrols. "Alone would be better," she replied. 2 sets of eyes in different places. Bjorn's brow furrowed. "The Jarl's orders were clear after those tracks were spotted yesterday. No one patrols alone." Sigrun knew better than to argue further. The Jarl's word was law, and Hafnaheim's leader had grown increasingly cautious as winter deepened. Reports of desperate men from fallen settlements to the north had everyone on edge. Hungry men were dangerous men. The patrol route took them along the frozen river that marked Hafnaheim's northern boundary. True to form, Life chattered endlessly about trivial matters: his new axe, a girl he fancied, a dream about fishing in summer waters. Sigrun responded with grunts and occasional nods, her attention focused on the tree line and the vast white expanse beyond. By midday, the clouds had thickened, promising more snow before nightfall. The wind had picked up, carrying with it the sharp, clean scent of pine and ice. Sigrun had just signaled to Leif that they should turn back when something caught her eye: a disturbance in the snow near the frozen stream, perhaps 30 paces away. "Wait," she commanded, raising a hand to silence Leif's latest story. Her eyes narrowed, scanning the area carefully. There, a small dark shape against the white, partially covered by fresh snowfall. "Could be a trap," Leif whispered, suddenly alert, hand moving to his axe. Sigrun shook her head. Too small for an ambush. She drew her sword nonetheless, approaching cautiously, each step measured and silent despite the crunching snow. What she found made her breath catch. A child. No, a young girl, perhaps 14 summers old, lay curled in on herself beside the frozen stream. Her clothing was little more than rags, her small frame shivering violently. Blonde hair, matted and dirty, partially obscured a face blue with cold. Sigrun crouched beside the girl, keeping her sword ready. "Can you hear me?" she asked, her voice low but firm. The girl's eyes fluttered open, startlingly blue against her pale face, and widened in fear at the sight of the armed warrior looming over her. "We should leave her," Leif said, keeping his distance. "You know the laws. Strangers bring nothing but trouble, especially in winter when our stores are already strained." Sigrun knew he was right. Hrafnheim's survival depended on strict adherence to rules established over generations. Outsiders were tolerated only during trading seasons, and even then under close watch. A strange child in winter could be a decoy, a ploy to test their defenses, or worse, an ill omen that would turn the entire village against whoever brought her in. Yet something in the girl's eyes, a defiant spark despite her desperate condition, stirred something in Sigrun. Perhaps it was recognition of the same fire she carried, or simply basic human compassion that the harsh northern life had not yet frozen from her heart. "Go back to the village," Sigrun told Leif, not taking her eyes off the girl. "Tell them I'm checking the western ridge before returning." "But—" "That's an order," she said, her tone brooking no argument. "I outrank you, remember?" Leif hesitated, clearly torn between obedience and suspicion. Finally, he nodded reluctantly. "Be at the gate before sundown, or Bjorn will send out searchers." Once he was out of sight, Sigrun sheathed her sword and knelt fully beside the girl. Up close, she could see that beneath the dirt and fear, the child had fine features, high cheekbones, and a delicate jaw that spoke of good breeding, not the hard scrabble look of most vagrants. "Can you stand?" Sigrun asked, her voice gentler now. The girl tried to rise but collapsed back into the snow, her strength clearly spent. Without further hesitation, Sigrun removed her cloak and wrapped it around the girl's thin shoulders, then lifted her with ease. The child weighed almost nothing in her strong arms. "I'm taking you somewhere warm," Sigrun explained, though she wasn't sure the girl understood. "But you must remain quiet. Do you understand? Silent as death." A weak nod was her only response. Sigrun took a circuitous route back to the village, careful to avoid the main paths where they might be seen. Her mind raced with justifications, explanations, and, increasingly, doubt. What she was doing violated everything Hrafnheim stood for. The collective over the individual, security over charity, tradition over impulse. Yet she couldn't bring herself to leave this child to die alone in the snow. "The gods must be testing me," she muttered, feeling the girl's shallow breathing against her chest. "Or punishing me." By the time they reached the outskirts of Hrafnheim, the girl had lapsed into unconsciousness again. Sigrun skirted the main dwellings, approaching her own small house from the rear. She had built it herself, away from the center of the village, preferring solitude to the constant scrutiny of communal living. Now, that isolation would serve another purpose. Inside, she laid the girl on her own bed of furs near the hearth, quickly building up the fire from banked coals. As warmth gradually filled the single room, Sigrun removed the girl's sodden rags, revealing a body marked by hardship. Ribs clearly visible beneath pale skin, old bruises yellowing on her arms, and something else that made Sigrun pause. Around the girl's right wrist, a band of scarred tissue, the kind left by ropes or shackles worn too long. But it was the object around her neck that truly caught Sigrun's attention. A broken pendant on a leather cord. Half of what appeared to be an intricately carved symbol remained, the other half missing. The craftsmanship was fine, the material what appeared to be polished bone or ivory, certainly not something a common thrall or beggar would possess. As Sigrun wrapped the girl in dry blankets, blue eyes suddenly flew open, wide with panic. "You're safe," Sigrun said quickly, raising empty hands to show she meant no harm. "I won't hurt you." The girl's gaze darted around the unfamiliar surroundings before settling back on Sigrun's face. Her cracked lips parted, forming words too faint to hear. Sigrun leaned closer. "What did you say?" "They'll come for me," the girl whispered, her voice accented but understandable. "They always come." "Who will come?" Sigrun asked, but the girl had already slipped back into unconsciousness, her body surrendering to exhaustion. Sigrun sat back on her heels, studying the mysterious child. Who was she? A runaway thrall, a survivor from a raided settlement? And who might be pursuing her? The questions multiplied, each more troubling than the last. One thing was certain. By bringing this stranger into Hafnheim, Sigrun had potentially endangered everyone she was sworn to protect. Yet, looking at the girl's face, peaceful now in sleep, she couldn't bring herself to regret her decision. There would be consequences, certainly, but those were problems for tomorrow. Tonight, she had saved a life, and that, at least, the gods would surely understand. As darkness fell outside, Sigrun prepared a simple broth from dried meat and herbs. The aroma filled the small dwelling, homey and comforting against the howling wind that had picked up outside. When she gently roused the girl to drink, those blue eyes seemed clearer, more focused. "Can you tell me your name?" Sigrun asked, supporting the girl's head as she sipped the warm liquid. A moment of hesitation, then, "Eydis." "Eydis," Sigrun wakited. "I am Sigrun, Eriksdottir. You're in Hrafnheim." Understanding flickered across the girl's face, followed by something like fear. Hrafnheim, she echoed, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. The Raven's home. Sigrun nodded, surprised by the girl's knowledge of their settlement's name meaning. How did you come to be alone by the frozen river, Eydis? But the girl's eyes had already drifted shut again, her body demanding rest more than conversation. Sigrun didn't push further. There would be time for questions when strength returned. For now, she would stand watch and wonder what storm this child might bring to her door. The morning brought heavy snowfall, and with it a momentary reprieve. No one would expect Sigrun to patrol in such weather, giving her precious time alone with her unexpected guest. Eydis had slept through the night, her breathing stronger, color gradually returning to her cheeks. While the girl slept, Sigrun examined the broken pendant more carefully. The remaining half showed intricate knotwork surrounding what appeared to be an animal, perhaps a wolf or bear, though it was difficult to tell with only half the image remaining. The craftsmanship was exceptional, the kind reserved for jarls or those of noble blood. It was not a trinket one would give to a thrall or common child. Eydis stirred as Sigrun was preparing breakfast, a simple porridge of oats and dried berries. The girl sat up slowly, clutching the furs around her thin shoulders, watching Sigrun with wary eyes.
"You should eat," Sigrun said, offering a wooden bowl, "to regain your strength." Eydis accepted the food with trembling hands, but didn't immediately eat, instead studying Sigrun with an intensity that seemed beyond her years. "Why did you help me?" she finally asked, her voice stronger than the previous night, but still bearing that strange accent Sigrun couldn't quite place. Sigrun considered the question, finding herself unexpectedly without a simple answer. "Because leaving you there would have been wrong," she finally said. It wasn't the complete truth, but it was part of it. Eydis seemed to accept this, taking a small bite of the porridge. After a few cautious mouthfuls, hunger apparently overcame suspicion, and she began to eat with greater urgency. "Slowly," Sigrun cautioned, "your stomach will rebel if you rush." The girl nodded, forcing herself to eat more deliberately. When she had finished, she set the bowl aside and touched the pendant at her throat, as if reassuring herself it was still there. "That symbol," Sigrun said, gesturing to the broken piece. "What does it represent?" Eydis's fingers closed protectively around the pendant. "It was my mother's," she said, offering no further explanation. "And where is your mother now?" "Dead." The word fell between them like a stone, flat and final. "They're all dead." "Who is they?" Sigrun pressed gently. Eydis looked away, her jaw tightening. "My family, my people." After a long pause, she added almost inaudibly, "My clan." Before Sigrun could ask more, a sharp knock at the door made them both jump. Eydis's eyes widened in alarm. "Stay quiet," Sigrun whispered, grabbing a blanket and quickly covering the girl's distinctive blonde hair. "Don't make a sound." Heart pounding, Sigrun moved to the door, composing her features into a mask of irritation at being disturbed. She opened it just enough to see who stood outside. Leif's anxious face peered back at her.
"Sigrun, you're needed," he said without preamble. "The council has called an emergency meeting." "What's happened?" she asked, careful to block his view inside. "Strangers to the north," Leif replied. "A small group, heavily armed. Bjorn thinks they might be scouts for a larger force." He paused, lowering his voice. "And there are rumors of a missing child among them. They're demanding to search every dwelling in the area." Sigrun felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. "Tell the council I'll be there shortly." After Leif departed, she turned to find Eydis standing, the blanket pulled tightly around her shoulders, fear evident in her stance. "They've found me," the girl whispered, confirming Sigrun's suspicions. "Who are they, Eydis? I can't protect you if I don't know what we're facing." For a moment, it seemed the girl might retreat back into silence. Then, with visible effort, she straightened her spine. "Men who serve Ulfric Gudmundsson," she said, the name carrying a weight of loathing. They killed my family, burned our settlement, took me captive." Her hand went unconsciously to the scarred tissue on her wrist. "I escaped 3 days ago." Ulfric Gudmundsson. The name was known in Hrafnheim. A powerful jarl from the eastern territories, ambitious and ruthless. His clan had been expanding their influence for years, absorbing smaller settlements through alliance or force. Why would a jarl like Gudmundsson destroy an entire clan for one child? Sigrun asked, the pieces not fitting together. Eydis's eyes met hers, ancient sorrow in a young face. "Because of what I know, because of who I am." Her fingers tightened around the broken pendant. "And because dead clans tell no tales of betrayal." Before Sigrun could press for clarification, another knock came at the door, harder, more insistent. "Sigrun Eriksdotter," a deep voice called. "The council awaits." She grabbed her sword belt, buckling it quickly. "Stay here," she told Eydis. "Bar the door behind me. I'll return as soon as I can." The girl nodded, fear and determination warring in her expression. "Be careful," she whispered. "Ulfric's men lie as easily as they breathe." Sigrun stepped out into the swirling snow, hearing the wooden bar slide into place behind her. The man waiting, Gunnar, one of the Jarl's personal guards, gestured impatiently toward the great hall at the center of the settlement. As she trudged through deepening snow, Sigrun's mind raced. She had unwittingly placed herself at the center of what appeared to be a blood feud between powerful clans. Worse, she had potentially brought danger to Hrafnheim's doorstep. The punishment for such actions could be severe. Banishment at best, death at worst. Yet something in Eydis's eyes, in the quiet dignity with which she spoke of her murdered family, made Sigrun certain she had made the right choice. Whatever secret the girl carried, it was worth protecting, even if it meant defying her own people to do so. The great hall was already crowded when Sigrun entered, the air thick with wood smoke and tension. At the center, seated on a carved chair upon a slightly raised platform, was Jarl Halvard, leader of Hrafnheim for the past 15 winters. Though gray now streaked his once red beard, his eyes remained sharp as he surveyed the gathered villagers. Beside him sat Lagertha Thorbjornsdottir, the eldest member of the council and keeper of the clan's oral history. Her weathered face was impassive, but Sigrun knew from experience that little escaped the old woman's notice. "Sigrun Eiriksdottir," Jarl Halvard's voice cut through the murmured conversations, bringing immediate silence. "You were on northern patrol yesterday. Did you observe anything unusual?" All eyes turned to her. Sigrun stepped forward, conscious of the weight of her lie even before she spoke it. "Nothing beyond what Leif and I reported, Jarl." The usual animal tracks, but no signs of human passage. The Jarl's eyes narrowed slightly. "Nothing at all? No disturbances in the snow? No signs of a lone traveler?" "No, Jarl," Sigrun replied steadily, though she felt sweat forming despite the hall's chill. The fresh snow had covered most tracks by the time of our patrol. A new voice spoke from the shadows near the entrance, smooth, cultured, with an accent that marked him as from the eastern territories. "That is most interesting, Shieldmaiden, considering my men tracked a fugitive directly to this area." A tall figure stepped into the firelight, a man perhaps in his early 40s, with black hair pulled back in a severe knot at the nape of his neck.
His face bore the marks of old pock scars, but they did nothing to diminish the aura of authority he projected. Most striking was the jagged scar that ran from his right temple down to his jaw, puckered and angry against his pale skin. Ulfric Gudmundsson, Jarl Halvard acknowledged, his tone carefully neutral. You honor Hrafnheim with your presence. Ulfric inclined his head slightly, the gesture more condescending than respectful. I come seeking what is mine, Halvard. A thrall girl, escaped from my household. Young, blonde, likely half dead from exposure. His cold eyes fixed on Sigrun, and I have reason to believe she may have been found by one of your people. Sigrun felt blood rushing in her ears, but kept her expression impassive. Many blonde girls in the north, Gudmundsson. Perhaps your thrall found shelter elsewhere, or perhaps the wolves found her first. A dangerous smile played across Ulfric's starred face. This particular girl would be memorable. She bears a distinctive mark on her shoulder, a birthmark in the shape of what some might call a raven's wing. He paused, watching reactions carefully. And she wears a broken pendant carved from the tusk of a walrus. Family heirloom, you understand, quite valuable. The description of the pendant sent a jolt through Sigrun. She had indeed seen such a birthmark on Eydis's shoulder when tending to her, a dark patch of skin that, with some imagination, could resemble a raven's wing. But something in Ulfric's too smooth explanation rang false. No such girl has come to Hrafnheim, Jarl Halvard stated firmly. But in the spirit of good relations between our clans, you may question my people directly. Ulfric's smile widened, revealing teeth too perfect, too white. I thank you for your cooperation, Jarl Halvard. My men will begin searches immediately. Searches, Lagertha spoke for the first time, her voice cracking with age, but still commanding. That was not offered, Gudmundsson. Questioning is one thing, invading our homes is quite another. Ulfric turned his cold gaze to the old woman. With respect, elder, a missing thrall is a serious matter. The girl is unstable, dangerous even. For your own safety, a thorough search is necessary. The hall erupted in protests. Hrafnheim's people were proud and private, their homes considered sacred space. Even the Jarl rarely imposed on that privacy. Jarl Halvard raised a hand for silence. What makes this thrall so valuable that you personally lead the search, Gudmundsson? Surely a man of your stature has more pressing matters than chasing a single runaway. Something dangerous flashed in Ulfric's eyes. The girl stole something of great value before fleeing. A family heirloom, the pendant I mentioned. I merely wish to recover what is rightfully mine. Lagertha's eyes narrowed. Strange that you mentioned the pendant before the theft. Most men would name the crime first, then describe what was stolen. Ulfric's scarred face hardened. I did not come to be questioned by an old woman, no matter how revered she may be in this modest settlement. He turned back to Halvard. My men will search every dwelling, starting now. Any interference will be considered an act of hostility between our clans. The threat hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Ulfric's clan was larger, wealthier, with more warriors at their disposal. Hrafnheim, isolated and relatively small, could not afford open conflict, especially not in the depths of winter when supplies were already strained. Jarl Halvard's jaw tightened, but he gave a reluctant nod. Very well. Your men may search, but they will be accompanied by members of our own guard at all times, and they will treat our people with respect." "Of course," Ulfric agreed smoothly. He gestured to the men who had entered silently behind him, 6 warriors, heavily armed, despite the pretense of a peaceful visit. "Begin with the outskirts and work inward." Sigrun's heart sank. Her dwelling would be among the first searched. She needed to warn Eydis, to hide her somehow. But with all eyes in the hall upon her, leaving now would only draw suspicion. "Sigrun," Jarl Hallvard called, "since you patrol the northern boundary, you will accompany Gudmundsson's men on their search of that area. Your knowledge of the terrain may prove useful." It was both a blessing and a curse. She would be present when they reached her home, but unable to reach Eydis beforehand. She bowed her head in acceptance, mind racing for a solution. "I would be honored to assist our guests," she managed, meeting Ulfric's gaze with a steadiness she didn't feel. As the assembly dispersed, Sigrun found herself walking along Lagertha, the old woman's pace surprisingly brisk despite her years. "The girl with the pendant," Lagertha said quietly, her words for Sigrun's ears alone. "Is she safe?" Sigrun nearly stumbled in shock. I don't—" "Save your lies for Gudmundsson," Lagertha cut her off. "I've known you since you were in swaddling clothes, Sigrun Eriksdottir. Your face has always revealed what your lips try to hide." The old woman glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard.
"The pendant. Did you see the symbol clearly?" Hesitantly, Sigrun nodded. Half of it, some kind of animal surrounded by knotwork. Lagertha's wrinkled hand gripped Sigrun's arm with surprising strength. "Listen carefully. That pendant bears the symbol of Clan Shieldmaiden, the Shieldmaidens, a clan thought destroyed 5 winters ago in what was called a tragic accident." "Shieldmar," Sigrun repeated, the name stirring some distant memory. "I've heard tales." "Not tales, history," Lagertha corrected sharply. "One of the oldest clans, known for their women warriors and their strategic coastal holdings. All reportedly killed when their great hall mysteriously burned during a winter gathering." The old woman's blue eyes bored into Sigrun's. "All except, it seems, one young girl." Understanding dawned like ice water in Sigrun's veins. Eydis is not a thrall. "No," Lagertha agreed grimly. "If I'm right, she is the last surviving heir to Clan Shieldmar, and if Ulfric Gudmundsson is hunting her with such determination—" "Then he had something to do with the clan's destruction," Sigrun finished, the pieces falling into place. "And she's the only witness." Lagertha nodded. "Find a way to delay the search of your dwelling. I will try to help the girl, but you must buy us time." Before Sigrun could ask how the old woman knew where Eydis was hidden, Lagertha had melted away into the crowd, her gray head disappearing among the villagers preparing for the unwelcome search. Left alone with this new knowledge, Sigrun felt the weight of responsibility settle more heavily on her shoulders. Eydis wasn't just a runaway thrall or an orphan child. She was potentially the last survivor of a massacred clan, a living testament to what must have been an act of calculated genocide. And Sigrun had unwittingly placed herself between this girl and the man who would silence her forever. The search began methodically, with Ulfric's men splitting into pairs, each accompanied by one of Hrafnheim's guards. Sigrun found herself assigned to shadow a particularly unpleasant warrior named Hakon, whose eyes lingered too long on the women they encountered during their searches. She deliberately led the search party on a circuitous route, starting with dwellings farthest from her own, inventing reasons to thoroughly search outbuildings and storage sheds that could not possibly hide a person. Each delay earned her dark looks from Hakon, but she maintained an air of diligent thoroughness. The girl couldn't have gotten far in this weather, Hakon commented as they trudged between buildings. Especially not dressed in rags. Someone must be sheltering her. If she exists at all, Sigrun countered. Perhaps your Jarl's thrall simply died in the snow. It happens. Hakon's laugh was ugly. Oh, she exists, and she's no ordinary thrall. Ulfric wants her back, intact. The way he emphasized the last word made Sigrun's skin crawl. Though once he's done with her, he might let the rest of us have our turn. Sigrun's hand twitched toward her sword, but she restrained herself. Rising to his bait would only endanger Eydis further. Your Jarl seems to expend a great deal of effort for a simple servant. Simple, Hakon snorted. Nothing simple about that one. Fought like a wildcat when we took her. Killed 2 men before they subdued her, even half-starved as she was. A note of grudging respect entered his voice. Ulfric had to keep her chained after that. The casual mention of the girl's captivity and the implied threat of what awaited her if recaptured strengthened Sigrun's resolve. Whatever it took, she would not let Eydis fall back into this man's hands. As they approached the next cluster of dwellings, Sigrun spotted a familiar figure slipping between buildings. Lagertha, moving with surprising stealth for one her age.
Had she reached Eydis in time? There was no way to know. We should check the smithy next, Sigrun suggested, pointing to her father's forge, deliberately leading them away from the path to her own dwelling. Hakon's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "We'll continue in order," he said, gesturing toward the very path she'd hoped to avoid. "Those dwellings next, including that one standing apart." He nodded toward Sigrun's home. Her heart sank. "As you wish." As they drew closer to her dwelling, Sigrun desperately sought a distraction, anything to delay the inevitable discovery. Then, like an answer from the gods, a commotion erupted from the direction of the great hall. Shouts rang out, followed by the clash of metal. Hakon's head snapped toward the sound, hand going to his sword. "What treachery is this?" he growled, already moving toward the disturbance. Sigrun followed, relief and fresh anxiety warring within her. Something had happened, something that had nothing to do with Eydis, she hoped, and it might give her the chance she needed. They arrived at the great hall to find a scene of controlled chaos. One of Ulfric's men lay on the ground, blood seeping from a wound in his shoulder. Standing over him, sword drawn, was Bjorn, his face thunderous with rage. He was caught trying to enter the Jarl's private quarters, Bjorn announced to the gathering crowd. When challenged, he drew his weapon. Ulfric pushed through the onlookers, his scarred face darkening at the sight of his injured man. "A misunderstanding, surely," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. "Your man was found rifling through private correspondence," Jarl Halvard stated coldly, emerging from the hall. The atmosphere had shifted palpably. What had been reluctant accommodation now teetered on the edge of open hostility. Rafnheim's people moved closer together, hands drifting to weapons.
Ulfric assessed the situation with calculating eyes. An overzealous subordinate, nothing more. He will be disciplined. He turned to his remaining men. "Continue the search, quickly." Sigrun seized her moment. "Jarl Halvard," she called, stepping forward. "With your permission, I would like to join Bjorn in securing the Great Hall. If one intruder sought sensitive information, others might attempt the same." The Jarl studied her briefly before nodding. "Granted, Sigrun. Bjorn could use another sword he trusts." Håkon began to protest, but Ulfric silenced him with a gesture. "Let her go. We have enough men to complete the search without her assistance." Sigrun bowed formally, betraying none of her relief, and moved to Bjorn's side. As she passed Lagertha in the crowd, the old woman gave her the slightest of nods. Confirmation, Sigrun hoped, that Eydis was safely hidden. For the next hour, Sigrun remained at her post, watching as Ulfric's men completed their search of the village, including her own dwelling. When they returned empty-handed, the frustration on Ulfric's face was poorly concealed. "Your cooperation is noted, Jarl Halvard," he said stiffly. "But I remain convinced the girl passed through your territory, perhaps one of your outlying farms." "You've searched every dwelling in Hrafnheim," Halvard replied firmly. "I cannot allow you to disrupt our satellite farms without more substantial evidence than a hunch." Ulfric's jaw tightened, the scar on his face whitening with tension. "Very well, but know this. The girl is dangerous, possibly deranged. If any of your people encounter her, they would be wise to capture her immediately and send word to me." His cold eyes swept the assembled villagers. "There would be a substantial reward for her return." With that thinly veiled threat hanging in the air, Ulfric and his men departed, the injured warrior supported between two others. Sigrun watched them go, her relief tempered by the certainty that this was merely a temporary reprieve. A man like Ulfric Gudmundsson did not surrender his prey so easily. As the village slowly returned to its normal rhythm, Sigrun sought out Lagertha, finding the old woman in her dwelling, a small, neat structure filled with the tools of her position as keeper of histories, shelves of rune sticks, carefully preserved scrolls, and objects of significance to the clan's past. "Is she safe?" Sigrun asked without preamble once they were alone. Lagertha nodded, gesturing to a heavy wooden chest against the wall. "For now." The lid of the chest lifted slightly, and Eydis's pale face emerged, her eyes wide with fear and relief. "You hid in plain sight," Sigrun marveled, "right under their noses." "The oldest tricks are often the best," Lagertha said with a hint of smugness. "Ulfric's men searched this dwelling early on. They saw an old woman's storage chest and thought nothing of it." Eydis climbed out stiffly, wincing as she straightened cramped limbs. "They would have killed me if they'd found me," she said, her young voice steady despite the dire words, "and probably everyone who helped me." "Which is why you must tell us everything now," Lagertha said, lowering herself onto a bench and gesturing for the others to sit. "The full truth, child, about your clan, about Ulfric, and about that pendant you wear." Eydis's hand went protectively to the broken pendant, her eyes darting between the two women. After a moment of internal struggle, she seemed to come to a decision. "My full name is Eydis Skjoldmarsdottir," she began, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "Daughter of Freydis, matriarch of Clan Skjoldmar. 5 winters ago, our entire clan gathered for the midwinter feast at our main settlement. I was 9 summers old." Her eyes took on a faraway look. "That night, while everyone slept, men came. They barred the doors of the great hall from the outside and set fire to it." Sigrun felt a chill run down her spine. "Ulfric's men?" Eydis nodded. "My mother suspected he might attempt something. She had refused his offer of marriage, a union that would have given him control of our coastal territories. So she had arranged for me to sleep in a different building that night with my old nurse.
The girl's voice cracked slightly. I watched the hall burn, heard the screams. My nurse held me back when I tried to run to help. How did you survive afterward? Lagertha asked gently. My nurse took me north, to distant kin. We lived quietly for years, always moving, never staying long enough to draw attention. Eydis's fingers traced the broken edge of her pendant. But she grew ill last winter, and before she died, she told me the truth, that I was not just a survivor, but the rightful heir to Clan Skaldmere. That my mother had suspected treachery and entrusted half of our clan's symbol to me, keeping the other half with her. The broken pendant, Sigrun murmured, 2 halves of one whole. Yes, she told me that if the halves were ever reunited, it would prove my identity beyond question. Eydis's expression darkened. Somehow, Ulfric learned I was alive. His men came in the night, killed the family sheltering me, and took me captive. He demanded to know where the other half of the pendant was, the half my mother kept. And did you know? Lagertha asked shrewdly. Eydis shook her head. No, but he wouldn't believe me. He kept me chained, questioned me daily. Her voice dropped to a whisper. He said he would break me eventually, that everyone breaks. And when I'd told him everything, he would kill me, just as he killed my mother. The 3 sat in silence for a moment, the gravity of the girl's story settling around them like a heavy cloak. Without the other half of the pendant, you have no proof of your identity, Lagertha finally said. And without proof, no other clans will support your claim against Ulfric. I know, Eydis admitted, shoulders slumping. But I couldn't stay his prisoner, waiting for him to kill me once I was no longer useful. Sigrun studied the young girl, barely more than a child, yet carrying the weight of an entire clan's legacy. Why did you come this direction? Did you know of Hrafnheim? A flicker of hesitation crossed Eydis's face before she answered. My nurse spoke of Hrafnheim. She said there were those here who might remember Clan Skaldmere with kindness. Her eyes moved to Lagertha. She mentioned a wise woman who keeps the old histories. Lagertha nodded slowly. Your nurse chose well. I remember your clan, child. And I remember your mother. Freydis was a formidable woman, respected by all who knew her. The old woman's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. But there is more to this story, I think. Ulfric's determination goes beyond silencing a witness or securing coastal territory. Eydis looked down at her hands. Before she died, my mother hid something valuable enough that Ulfric has hunted me for 5 years to find it. What was it? Sigrun asked. I don't know exactly. My nurse called it proof of treachery. Evidence that Ulfric had betrayed not just our clan, but many others. That he had made deals with southern kingdoms, selling northern secrets for personal gain. Eydis looked up, her young face grave. If such proof exists and becomes known, Ulfric would lose everything. His position, his allies, his life. The implications were staggering. If what Eydis said was true, Ulfric Gudmundsson had committed not just murder, but treason against all the northern clans. And your mother hid this proof where? Lagertha pressed. She told me only that it was where the Shieldmaidens first raised their swords, a place significant to our clan's founding. Eydis spread her hands helplessly. I don't know what that means exactly.
Our clan controlled many territories. Lagertha sat back, her weathered face thoughtful. I may know. The histories speak of the Shieldmaiden's first battle, a desperate defense against raiders at a place called Ravencliff, the cliffs where ravens nest. She glanced at Sigrun. It's not far from here, a day's journey to the east. Sigrun felt the weight of destiny settling on her shoulders. What had begun as a simple act of compassion, saving a freezing girl from certain death, had evolved into something far more complex and dangerous. Yet looking at Eydis's face, seeing the echo of a proud lineage in her features, Sigrun knew she could not turn back now. "Ulfric will not give up," she said. "He'll return with more men, more demands, and eventually he'll find her." "Unless we find this proof first," Lagertha replied, her old eyes suddenly alight with purpose. "Evidence of treason would turn every clan against him. Even his own people would abandon a leader who betrayed the north to southern kings." Eydis looked between them, hope and fear warring in her expression. "You would help me, even knowing the danger?" Sigrun met the girl's gaze steadily. Clan Shieldmar was known for its women warriors, its Shieldmaidens. As one who has chosen that path myself, I cannot turn away from your cause. She glanced at Lagertha. "But we cannot involve all of Hravenheim in this. The risk is too great." "Agreed," Lagertha said. "This must remain between us for now. Jarl Halvard is a good leader, but cautious. He would not approve a mission that might bring Ulfric's wrath upon our people." "Then we go alone," Sigrun decided, "to Ravencliff, to find whatever Eydis's mother hid." "Not entirely alone," Lagertha corrected. "I know someone who can guide you, someone who knows the eastern territories well and has no love for Ulfric Gudmundsson."
As night fell over Hravenheim, 3 figures slipped quietly from the settlement's eastern gate. Sigrun, armed and armored for battle. Eydis, now dressed in proper winter clothing borrowed from the village stores. And a taciturn man named Thorstein, a trader who had once lost everything to Ulfric's treachery and had readily agreed to Lagertha's request for assistance. The snow had stopped falling, but the night was bitterly cold, the moon casting blue-white light across the frozen landscape. They traveled in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, aware that they had crossed a threshold from which there might be no return. For Sigrun, the decision had come with surprising clarity. All her life she had sought purpose beyond the restricted roles available to women in their society. In protecting Eydis, in standing against the kind of tyranny Ulfric represented, she had found something worth fighting for, perhaps even worth dying for. As they crested a hill, Sigrun paused to look back at the distant lights of Hravenheim, wondering if she would ever see it again. Then, squaring her shoulders, she turned east, toward Ravencliff, toward answers, and toward whatever fate awaited them in the cold embrace of the winter night. Dawn broke reluctantly over the eastern horizon as Sigrun, Eydis, and Thorstein made their way through a dense forest of ancient pines. They had traveled through the night, stopping only briefly to rest and warm themselves with small, carefully hidden fires. Now, with morning light filtering weakly through the canopy above, Sigrun could finally see the strain of their journey etched on Eydis's young face. "We'll rest here," she decided, gesturing to a sheltered hollow formed by the massive roots of a fallen tree. "Eat something, regain our strength." Thorstein nodded grimly. He was a man of few words, middle-aged, with a face weathered by years spent traveling the harsh northern territories. The story Lagertha had shared was simple but powerful. Years ago, Ulfric had falsely accused Thorstein of theft, resulting in the confiscation of his trading goods and the death of his brother who had tried to defend him. Since then, he had lived on the margins, trading between smaller settlements, avoiding Ulfric's territory whenever possible. How much farther to Ravencliff? Sigrun asked as they settled into the relative shelter. "Half a day's journey," Thorstein replied, his voice raspy from disuse. "But the approach is exposed, open cliff tops overlooking the sea. If Gudmundson's men are searching, they'll spot us easily." Eydis huddled deeper into her borrowed furs, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. "We could wait until nightfall to approach." "Too dangerous in the dark," Thorstein shook his head. "The cliffs are treacherous even in daylight. One misstep and you'd fall to your death on the rocks below." Sigrun broke off pieces of hard bread and dried meat from their provisions, passing them around. "Tell me more about Ravencliff. Why would your mother choose it as a hiding place?" Eydis chewed thoughtfully before answering. "It's sacred to our clan. The place where the first Shieldmaidens fought off raiders generations ago, saving not just themselves, but the children and elders in their care." A hint of pride entered her voice. "The legends say they were outnumbered 10-1, but they held the narrow approach to the cliffs until help arrived." "A good defensive position then," Sigrun noted. "Limited access points, high ground." "Yes, but also treacherous," Thorstein added. "The area is known for sudden storms that sweep in from the sea. Men have been blown right off the cliffs by the wind." They ate in silence for a while, each contemplating the challenges ahead. Sigrun studied Eydis covertly, marveling at the girl's resilience. Despite everything she had endured, the loss of her family, years in hiding, captivity under Ulfric, she maintained a quiet dignity beyond her years. "What will you do?" Sigrun finally asked. "If we find this proof your mother hid, what then?" Eydis looked up, her blue eyes suddenly sharp with purpose. "I'll take it to the Thing, the gathering of clan leaders. Force them to acknowledge Ulfric's crimes and restore my clan's honor." Her voice dropped. "And then I'll rebuild. Gather what remains of our people, those who married into other clans, distant relatives, anyone with Shaldmire blood or loyalty." It was an ambitious goal for one so young, but Sigrun heard the determination in her voice and found herself believing it possible. If anyone could resurrect a fallen clan from ashes, perhaps it was this girl with her mother's steel in her spine. "We should move," Thorstein said, rising to his feet. "The weather is holding for now, but I don't trust it. Better to reach Ravencliff while we still have good visibility." They continued their journey through increasingly sparse forest, eventually emerging onto wind-swept highlands, where stunted trees bent permanently eastward from the constant sea winds. The air grew noticeably damper, carrying the tang of salt. In the distance, Sigrun could make out where the land ended abruptly, the cliffs of Ravencliff dropping away to the sea below. As they drew closer, Sigrun felt an increasing sense of exposure. They were visible for miles in all directions now, 3 dark figures moving across the white landscape. If Ulfric had men searching this area, discovery was almost inevitable. There, Thorstein pointed to a narrow path that wound down from the highest point of the cliff. "That's the approach the legends speak of, the place the Shieldmaidens defended." Sigrun surveyed the terrain with a warrior's eye.
It was indeed a natural choke point. Anyone trying to access the clifftop plateau would be forced through a narrow gap between 2 rocky outcroppings, allowing defenders to engage enemies 1 or 2 at a time. "Where would your mother have hidden something?" she asked Eydis. "Is there a cave, a structure?" Eydis frowned, scanning the area. There used to be a small shrine, stones arranged in a circle with a central altar. The Shieldmaidens would make offerings there before battle.
They spread out cautiously, searching the wind-swept plateau. The shrine, when they found it, was little more than a ruin. Weathered stones half buried in snow. The central altar cracked and listing to one side. "This is it," Eydis confirmed, approaching the ancient stones with reverence. But where would she hide something here? It's so exposed. Sigrun circled the shrine, studying it carefully. Not in the snow, not where weather could damage it. Her eyes were drawn to the central altar stone, massive and cracked, but still standing. Perhaps. She knelt beside the altar, brushing away accumulated snow, examining the base where it met the ground. There, a small gap between stone and earth, barely noticeable unless one was specifically looking. "Help me," she called to Thorstein. Together, they cleared more snow from the base of the altar, revealing that the massive stone sat atop a flat base stone partially embedded in the earth. "It might be underneath," Sigrun suggested, looking for a way to move the altar. Eydis joined them, her eyes widening as she noticed something carved into the side of the altar. Faint runes, nearly erased by years of exposure to the elements. "There's writing," she said, tracing the markings with her fingertips. "It says, 'Blood of the Shieldmaidens opens the way.'" "Blood?" Sigrun repeated. "A blood sacrifice?" "Not a sacrifice," Eydis said slowly. "A key." She touched her pendant. "The clan symbol. It's not just decorative." "My nurse once told me it could be used to open things only those of Shaldmare blood should access." She examined her broken pendant more carefully, turning it over in her hands. The back of the carved piece was not smooth as it appeared at first glance, but featured a small protruding element that could serve as a key. "There must be a keyhole," Sigrun said, running her hands over the altar stone. They searched methodically, clearing more snow, examining every inch of the weathered stone. Finally, Thorstein called out, "Here!" He had found a small, almost invisible opening in the base of the altar, a hole that might accommodate the projection on the back of Eydis's pendant. With trembling hands, Eydis inserted her half of the clan symbol. It fit, but nothing happened when she turned it. "It needs the other half," she said, disappointment evident in her voice. "Without the complete key, it won't work." Sigrun sat back on her heels, frustration welling up. They had come so far, risked so much, only to be thwarted by the missing piece of the pendant. "Wait," Eydis suddenly said. "My mother was clever. She would have anticipated that I might not have both halves." The girl closed her eyes, thinking hard. What did she always tell me? When the path seems blocked, look for the way underneath, a new voice completed from behind them. The three whirled around, Sigrun's hand flying to her sword. Standing at the edge of the ruined shrine was a figure they had not heard approach, a tall woman wrapped in a dark cloak, her face partially obscured by the hood. "Who are you?" Sigrun demanded, positioning herself protectively in front of Eydis. The woman stepped forward, pushing back her hood to reveal a face marked by years and hardship, but still bearing a striking resemblance to the girl behind Sigrun. "My name is Thyra Sheldmare's daughter," she said, her voice carrying across the wind-swept plateau. "Sister to Freydis, aunt to Eydis, and keeper of the other half of our clan symbol." For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Then Eydis broke past Sigrun's protective stance, taking a hesitant step toward the woman. "Aunt Thyra," she whispered, "they said, everyone said you died before I was born." "A necessary deception," Thyra replied, her eyes, the same startling blue as Eydis's, never leaving her niece's face. Your mother and I knew that someday someone would come for what our clan protected. We arranged that one of us would always remain hidden, unknown, a final safeguard. A shadow passed over her weathered features. I never imagined it would be my own niece I would be waiting for. From within her cloak she withdrew an object that caught the weak winter sunlight, the other half of the clan pendant, its broken edge a perfect match to the piece Eydis wore. "How did you find us?" Thorstein asked suspiciously, his hand still on his knife. "I have watched this place for 5 years," Thyra answered simply, "ever since the Night of Fire. And I have friends in many settlements who send word of strangers asking questions about Clan Shieldmaiden." Her gaze shifted to Sigrun, "including a Shieldmaiden from Rafnheim who defied her own people to protect a girl she did not know." Sigrun felt exposed under that penetrating blue stare, as if Thyra could see every thought, every doubt that had crossed her mind since finding Eydis in the snow. "You took a great risk," Thyra continued, "one that honors the tradition of the Shieldmaidens, whether you knew it or not." "I did what was right," Sigrun replied simply, "nothing more." A hint of a smile touched Thyra's stern mouth. "And that, Sigrun Eiriksdottir, is why my sister's plan may yet succeed." She turned back to Eydis, holding out the half-pendant. "Come, niece, it is time to claim your birthright, and the truth that will bring down Ulfric Gudmundsson." With trembling hands, Eydis accepted the offered piece. For a moment, she simply held the 2 halves of the pendant, one in each hand, studying them. Then, with deliberate care, she fitted them together. The broken edges aligned perfectly, forming a complete image, a shield crossed by a sword, surrounded by intricate knotwork. "The symbol of Clan Shieldmaiden," Thyra said softly, "worn by our matriarchs for generations." Eydis approached the altar stone once more, this time with the complete pendant. When she inserted it into the small opening and turned, a soft click echoed across the wind-swept plateau. The base of the altar shifted slightly, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. Within lay a small iron box, its surface etched with the same symbol as the pendant. Eydis lifted it carefully, looking to her aunt for guidance. "Open it," Thyra instructed. "It belongs to you now." Inside the box were several items: a small leather pouch, a rolled piece of parchment sealed with wax, and, most surprisingly, a dagger with an intricately carved bone handle. "The proof," Thyra explained, gesturing to the sealed parchment. "Letters between Ulfric and southern kings, offering to sell access to our northern shipping routes, information about our defenses, even the locations of sacred sites. Your mother intercepted them before they could reach their destination." "And the dagger?" Sigrun asked, eyeing the weapon curiously. "Ulfric's personal blade," Thyra replied grimly. "The one he used to kill a southern messenger when the man threatened to expose him. It bears his clan markings on the handle and the blood of his victim on the blade." "Blood that can be proven not to be northern," Thorstein murmured, understanding dawning. "Southern blood from a royal envoy." "Exactly," Thyra nodded. "Proof of not just treachery, but murder of a protected messenger, one of the gravest crimes under our laws." Eydis carefully rewrapped the items and placed them back in the box. "With this evidence, the clan leaders at the Thing will have to act against Ulfric." "Yes," Thyra agreed, "but first we must survive long enough to reach the Thing." Her expression darkened as she gazed past them toward the mainland. "And that may prove more difficult than anticipated. Sigrun followed her gaze, her blood turning to ice at what she saw. In the distance, moving across the snow-covered plain toward Ravencliff, was a line of dark figures, at least a dozen warriors on horseback, their weapons glinting in the winter sun. Ulfric's men, Thorstein confirmed, his voice tight with tension. They must have been tracking us. Or they were already searching this area, Thyra suggested. Ulfric is not a fool. He would have guessed that Ravencliff might hold what he seeks. Sigrun assessed their situation with a warrior's pragmatism. The only approach to their position was the narrow path they had used to access the clifftop plateau. A defensible position, but with 4 against 12 or more, not sustainable for long. "We need to move," she said decisively. "Find another way down from these cliffs." Thyra shook her head. "There is no other path safe enough to traverse. The rest of the cliff edge is too steep, too unstable." "Then we make our stand here," Sigrun decided, drawing her sword. "At the narrow approach, just as the first Shieldmaidens did." Eydis clutched the iron box to her chest, her young face pale but determined. "I won't be captured again," she said quietly. "I would rather jump from the cliff." "It won't come to that," Sigrun promised, though she had no right to make such a vow. "Thorstein, take position behind those rocks. You'll have clear shots with your bow as they come through the narrows." The traitor nodded grimly, stringing his bow with practiced movements. "Thyra, you and Eydis should—" "We will fight," Thyra interrupted, drawing a sword from beneath her cloak. "We are Skaldmere women. We do not hide while others bleed for us." There was no time to argue. The approaching riders had reached the base of the cliff path and were dismounting, preparing to ascend on foot. Sigrun could make out Ulfric's distinctive figure among them, his tall frame and the glint of his scale armor unmistakable even at a distance. "They'll reach the narrows in minutes," Thorstein warned, nocking an arrow. Sigrun positioned herself at the choke point, with Thyra beside her. Despite her age, the older woman moved with the fluid grace of a trained warrior, her sword held with confident familiarity. "Eydis," Thyra called over her shoulder, "hide the box among the altar stones. If we fall, perhaps some day another will find it." The girl quickly obeyed, securing the precious evidence in a crevice between the ancient stones before taking up position behind her aunt, a knife clutched in her small hands. "Remember," Sigrun told her companions as the first of Ulfric's men appeared on the path below, "we don't need to defeat them all. We just need to hold long enough for Eydis to escape with the evidence." "No one is escaping today," Thyra said grimly. "Look." Beyond the approaching warriors, dark clouds were gathering over the sea with unnatural speed. A storm front moving in, bringing with it the promise of blinding snow and treacherous conditions. Soon, all paths would be impassable. "Then we hold until the storm forces them to retreat," Sigrun amended, adjusting her grip on her sword. The first of Ulfric's warriors reached the narrows, 2 burly men with axes and shields. They hesitated at the sight of the defenders, clearly not having expected organized resistance. "Turn back," Sigrun called out, her voice carrying on the rising wind. "There's nothing for you here but death." The men exchanged glances, then charged forward with battle cries. Thorstein's arrow took one in the shoulder, staggering him, while Sigrun met the other head-on, her sword clashing against his axe. The narrow space worked to the defenders' advantage, forcing Ulfric's men to come at them 1 or 2 at a time. Sigrun fought with the controlled precision of a trained warrior, conserving her energy, making each movement count. Beside her, Thyra proved equally formidable, her age compensated for by experience and cunning. 3 of Ulfric's men fell in the initial assault, but more kept coming. Behind them, Sigrun could see Ulfric himself, shouting orders, his scarred face contorted with rage. "The girl," he bellowed. "Bring me the girl and whatever she carries." The fight intensified as more warriors pressed forward. Sigrun took a glancing blow to her side, the enemy's blade finding a gap in her armor. Pain flared, hot and sharp, but she pushed it aside, focusing on the next opponent, the next threat. Thyra fought like a woman possessed, her blade a blur of lethal movement. But even her skill couldn't prevent a spear thrust that caught her in the thigh, sending her staggering back a step. "Aunt Thyra!" Eydis cried out, rushing forward to support the wounded woman. Seeing the girl exposed, one of Ulfric's men lunged past Sigrun, reaching for Eydis with a mailed hand. Thorstein's arrow caught him in the throat before his fingers could close on her cloak, but the defensive line had been breached. "Fall back to the shrine," Sigrun ordered, cutting down another attacker as she retreated step by careful step. The defenders regrouped among the ancient stones, now forming a protective circle around Eydis. Blood stained the snow beneath them, their own and their enemies'. The storm was closing in rapidly now, the first snowflakes beginning to swirl around them, driven by an increasingly violent wind.
"Surrender the girl and the evidence, and the rest of you may live." Ulfric's voice carried over the rising storm, his men regrouping for another assault. "Never!" Thyra shouted back, her face pale from blood loss, but her sword steady. "Come claim them yourself, traitor!" It was a challenge Ulfric couldn't ignore. With a snarl, he pushed past his men, drawing his sword, a massive blade that gleamed dully in the fading light. He approached the shrine alone, confidence in every step. "Last chance," he called, his cold eyes fixed on Eydis. "Give me what is mine, girl, and your friends might yet survive this day." Eydis stepped forward, defiance in her stance, despite her trembling hands. "Nothing here belongs to you, Ulfric Gudmundsson. Not the land, not the clan symbol, and certainly not me." Ulfric's scarred face twisted with rage. "Insolent child, just like your mother." He raised his sword. "She died screaming, you know, begging for mercy that never came." With a cry of fury, Eydis lunged forward, her small knife aimed at Ulfric's heart. Sigrun moved to intercept her, but too late. The girl had committed herself to the attack. Ulfric laughed, easily sidestepping the clumsy assault and catching Eydis by the arm, twisting until she dropped her weapon with a cry of pain. "I've waited 5 years for this moment," he hissed, dragging the struggling girl against him, his sword at her throat. "Now, the evidence. Where is it?" "Let her go," Sigrun demanded, advancing a step, her own sword raised. "Stay back," Ulfric warned, pressing his blade against Eydis's skin until a thin line of blood appeared. "Or the last of Clan Shaldmar dies here and now." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring, the only sound the howling of the wind as the storm enveloped them fully. Snow swirled around the ancient shrine, reducing visibility to mere arm's length. Then, unexpectedly, Eydis stopped struggling. Her body went limp in Ulfric's grasp, her head lolling forward as if she had fainted. Instinctively, Ulfric's grip loosened slightly, his attention momentarily diverted by the change in his captive. It was all the opening Sigrun needed. She hurled herself forward, not at Ulfric, but at Eydis, knocking both girl and captor off balance. In the same fluid movement, she brought her sword down on Ulfric's extended arm, her blade biting deep into the flesh just below his elbow. Ulfric roared in pain, releasing Eydis as blood spurted from the wound. The girl rolled free, scrambling back toward Thyra and Thorstein. Clutching his maimed arm, Ulfric staggered back, rage and disbelief warring on his face. "Kill them!" he screamed to his men. "Kill them all!" But the storm had reached its full fury, a howling white wall that separated Ulfric from his warriors. Visibility had dropped to nothing. Sigrun could barely make out her companions only steps away. "Retreat to the altar!" she shouted over the wind. "Stay together!" They huddled in the meager shelter of the ancient stones, backs to one another, weapons outward, waiting for an attack that might come from any direction. The cold was becoming as dangerous as any blade now, seeping through their clothing, numbing fingers and slowing reflexes. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, the storm showing no signs of abating. Occasionally they heard shouts or the clash of metal. Ulfric's disoriented men, perhaps, fighting amongst themselves in the blinding conditions. "We can't stay here," Thorstein finally said, his voice barely audible over the wind. "We'll freeze to death." "Move where?" Thyra demanded, her wounded leg now clearly causing her significant pain. "In this storm, one misstep means falling from the cliff." Eydis, who had been silent since her near death at Ulfric's hands, suddenly straightened. "The shrine," she said. "The altar stone. It must protect more than just the evidence."
Understanding dawned on Sigrun's face. A shelter? A way down from the cliffs? "It's possible," Thyra admitted. "The old stories speak of hidden paths, known only to the clan's leadership." With renewed purpose, they returned to the altar stone, now nearly buried in drifting snow. Eydis retrieved the iron box from its hiding place, then reinserted the complete clan pendant onto the locking mechanism, turning it fully this time. A grinding sound came from beneath the snow, not just the base shifting as before, but something larger, more significant. The entire altar stone was rotating, revealing a dark opening beneath, steps leading down into the earth. "A passage," Thyra breathed, amazement in her voice despite her weakened state. The old tales were true. Without hesitation, they descended into the darkness, Sigrun supporting the injured Thyra, while Thorstein brought up the rear, watching for pursuit. The passage was narrow, but tall enough to stand in, its walls lined with ancient stonework that spoke of skilled hands long turned to dust. As they moved deeper, the howling of the storm faded, replaced by an eerie silence broken only by their labored breathing and the scrape of their boots on stone steps. "Where does this lead?" Sigrun asked, her voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "To the sea, if the legends are true," Thyra replied. "To a hidden cove at the base of the cliffs, accessible only at low tide." They continued downward, the passage occasionally branching, forcing them to choose directions based on Thyra's fragmentary knowledge of the old stories. After what seemed an eternity of cautious descent, they began to hear a new sound, the rhythmic crash of waves against rock. The passage finally opened onto a small, sheltered cave, its mouth facing a narrow strip of beach currently exposed by the retreating tide. Outside, the storm still raged, but here, protected by the towering cliffs, its fury was somewhat diminished. "We need to move quickly," Thorstein said, eyeing the waterline. "When the tide returns, this path will be submerged." Thyra sank down on a rock, her face gray with pain and exhaustion. "I cannot go further," she admitted. "My leg, the wound is too deep." "We won't leave you," Eydis declared, clutching her aunt's hand. "You must," Thyra insisted. "The evidence must reach the thing. Nothing else matters now."
Sigrun assessed their situation with grim realism. Thyra could not travel in her condition. The tide would soon cut off their escape route. And somewhere above, Ulfric and his men were still searching, perhaps already discovering the hidden passage. "Thorstein," she said decisively, "take Eydis and the evidence east along the coast. There's a fishing village 2 days' journey from here. Find a boat, get her to the thing." "And you?" Eydis asked, though her eyes said she already knew the answer. "I'll stay with Thyra," Sigrun replied simply. "Buy you time if Ulfric finds the passage." "No," Eydis protested. "I won't leave you both to die." "Child," Thyra said gently, "sometimes survival is the hardest path. Sometimes living to fight another day requires more courage than dying in battle." She touched the clan pendant at Eydis's throat. "You are the last of Clan Shieldmaiden. If you die, everything your mother fought for dies with you." Tears streaked Eydis's dirt-smudged face, but she nodded reluctantly. "I will see justice done," she promised, "for all of us." Thorstein checked his remaining arrows and adjusted his cloak. "We should go now, while the tide is still far enough out." After a final desperate embrace with her aunt, Eydis allowed Thorstein to lead her from the cave. Sigrun watched them go, 2 dark figures moving carefully along the narrow strip of beach, soon lost in the swirling snow. Alone with Thyra, Sigrun turned her attention to the wounded woman. Using strips torn from her own cloak to bind the leg wound more securely.
"You could have gone with them," Thyra observed, watching Sigrun's efficient movements. "Probably should have." Sigrun shrugged. "And leave the last adult member of Clan Shieldmaiden to die alone? What kind of Shieldmaiden would that make me?" A hint of a smile touched Thyra's pale lips. One with better survival instincts, perhaps. They lapsed into silence, listening to the storm outside and the steadily approaching tide. Sigrun built a small fire from driftwood collected near the cave entrance, its warmth a small comfort against the encroaching cold. "Tell me about your clan," Sigrun finally said, settling beside the wounded woman. "About the Shieldmaidens of old." And so, as the tide crept higher and the fire burned low, Thyra shared the history of Clan Shieldmaiden, tales of women warriors who had defied convention, who had fought not just for glory, but for their people's survival. Stories passed down through generations, preserving a legacy of strength, honor, and sacrifice. Hours passed. The tide reached its peak and began to recede once more. The storm showed signs of weakening, the wind's howl diminishing to a more manageable roar. And still, no sign of pursuit from above. "Perhaps they gave up," Sigrun suggested, though she didn't believe it herself. "Or the storm drove them away." Thyra shook her head. "Ulfric doesn't give up. Not when he's this close." She shifted, wincing as the movement disturbed her wound. "But perhaps we've bought enough time. If Eydis and Thorstein move quickly, they could reach the fishing village before Ulfric's men can regroup and search the coastline." Sigrun nodded, trying to ignore the cold certainty settling in her gut, that their own chances of survival were diminishing with each passing hour. Thyra's wound showed signs of infection, her skin hot to the touch despite the cave's chill. And without supplies, exposed to the elements, their situation was precarious at best.
As if reaching her thoughts, Thyra reached out, grasping Sigrun's wrist with surprising strength. "Listen to me," she said urgently. "If I don't survive, but you do, find Eydis. Help her rebuild our clan." "She has Thorstein," Sigrun pointed out, "and once she reaches the thing, she'll have allies." "She needs more than allies," Thyra insisted. She needs someone who understands what it means to walk between worlds, to be a woman and a warrior in a society that wants you to choose. Her blue eyes, so like her niece's, held Sigrun's gaze. Someone like you. Before Sigrun could respond, a sound from the passage leading down from the cliffs made them both freeze. The unmistakable scrape of boots on stone, growing closer. Moving silently, Sigrun extinguished the fire and drew her sword, positioning herself between the passage entrance and Thyra. Whoever was coming, be it Ulfric himself or his men, would find the last of Clan Shieldmaiden protected to the end. The footsteps grew louder, echoing in the narrow passage. Then a figure emerged into the dim light of the cave. Not Ulfric or his warriors, but a familiar, weathered face framed by gray hair. "Lagertha!" Sigrun gasped, lowering her sword in disbelief. The old woman stepped fully into the cave, followed by half a dozen armed men from Hrafnheim, including Bjorn and, most surprisingly, Sigrun's father, Eirik. "Did you think I would send you on such a journey without ensuring you had support when needed?" Lagertha asked, her tone mildly reproving despite the hint of affection in her eyes. "How did you find us?" Sigrun asked, still stunned by their appearance. "I know the old stories, too," Lagertha replied simply. "And I've suspected for years that the tales of secret passages beneath Ravencliff held truth." She gestured to the men behind her. "When Ulfric and his warriors were spotted heading east, Jarl Halvard agreed we could no longer remain neutral."
Eirik stepped forward, his eyes taking in Sigrun's bloodied appearance and the wounded woman behind her. For perhaps the first time in years, he looked at his daughter not with disappointment, but with something approaching respect. "You took a great risk," he said gruffly, "for a stranger." "For what was right," Sigrun corrected, echoing her own words to Thyra earlier. A hint of a smile cracked her father's stern facade. Your mother would have said the same. He gestured to the men who had brought a stretcher. "Come, we need to move before Ulfric's men find this passage." As they carefully transferred Thyra to the stretcher, Lagertha explained their plan. A ship waited in a cove further along the coast, ready to take them directly to where the thing would be gathering in 3 days' time. "Eydis and Thorstein?" Sigrun asked anxiously. "Already found and aboard the ship," Lagertha assured her. "The girl refused to sail until we had searched for you and her aunt." Relief washed over Sigrun, so powerful it nearly brought her to her knees. They had done it. Against all odds, they had secured the evidence and protected Eydis. Now justice might finally be possible. As they made their way along the beach, the storm gradually subsiding above them, Sigrun found herself walking beside her father. An awkward silence stretched between them, years of unspoken disappointments and divergent expectations creating a gulf wider than words could easily bridge. Finally, Eirik cleared his throat. "When Lagertha told us what was happening, about the girl, about Clan Shieldmaiden, I thought you had been reckless, foolish." He paused, his weathered face working with unaccustomed emotion. "I was wrong." Sigrun glanced at him sharply, unused to hearing such an admission from the stern blacksmith. "What you did," he continued haltingly, "protecting the girl, standing against Ulfric's treachery, it was worthy of the sagas, worthy of—" He hesitated, then finished, "worthy of a true Shieldmaiden." Coming from her father, who had spent years trying to convince her to set aside her warrior's path for a more traditional life, it was perhaps the highest praise she could receive. Sigrun felt a knot in her throat, years of seeking his approval suddenly fulfilled in this most unexpected moment. "Thank you, father," she said simply, knowing he would understand all that remained unspoken between them.
They reached the waiting ship as the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, casting golden light across the turbulent sea. On deck, Eydis stood watching for them, her face lighting up at the sight of her aunt being carefully carried aboard. In that moment, as Sigrun stepped onto the ship that would carry them to the thing and to justice, she felt something she had not experienced in years, a sense of belonging, of purpose that went beyond the daily duties of a village Shieldmaiden. In protecting Eydis, in standing against Ulfric's tyranny, she had found something she hadn't even known she was seeking. The ship set sail with the turning tide, bearing them eastward toward the gathering of clan leaders where Ulfric Gudmundsson would finally face justice for his crimes. On deck, Sigrun stood with Eydis, watching the cliffs of Ravencliff recede in the distance. "What happens now?" the girl asked quietly. "After the thing, after Ulfric is judged, what then?" Sigrun thought of Thyra's request, of Lagertha's wisdom, of her father's newfound respect. She thought of Hrafnheim, which had been her home but never quite her place. "Now," she replied, placing a hand on Eydis's shoulder, "we rebuild what was broken. We honor those who were lost. And we forge a new path, for Clan Skaldmere, for the Shieldmaidens, and for ourselves." As the wind filled the sail and carried them toward an uncertain but hopeful future, Sigrun understood what Thyra had meant about the courage required to survive. Sometimes the hardest battle was not the one fought with sword and shield, but the daily struggle to create meaning from loss, to build something new from the ashes of what had been destroyed. The worst fate for a Shieldmaiden was not death in battle, or even abandonment in the snow. It was living without purpose, without connection to something greater than oneself. In saving Eydis, Sigrun had saved herself as well, finding in the young heir to Clan Skaldmere a cause worthy of her sword and her heart. And as the sun broke fully through the clouds, bathing the ship in golden light, Sigrun knew with bone-deep certainty that this journey, begun in ice and blood and desperate courage, was not an ending, but a beginning. The Shieldmaidens would rise again, and she would be there to see it happen, sword in hand and purpose in her heart.